I felt that the world is telling me I'm not meant to be a mom. And if I can be that story that someone listens to and feels like, oh, well, you know, it was so challenging for her, but she finally got to the other side. Like, there's nothing I would want more than that. That was sort of what I was always looking for when we were going through it.
Carly, this is so exciting to have you on the show. And that suggests that you made it through your fertility journey. Yay!
We are officially on the other side. Thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be here and my pleasure. And I can't believe I'm here.
Not only are you here, but you're suddenly the mother of 2 little infants.
I am. I am the mother of 2 babies that are 17 weeks apart to the day.
Oh my gosh. And one's a boy and the other one's a girl. And they came from 2 different gestational carriers.
They did.
And that, as we start right there, suggests that this was not a straightforward journey in any way possible.
No, it was certainly not straightforward at all. And if someone had told me at the very beginning that the path would look this way and be as long as it was and challenging and up and down and around, I would have not believed them, and I would have opted out. And
you think you would have opted out?
Yes, but in hindsight, it was the way that we were meant to get here, which feels cheesy to say, but is true. And hindsight's 20/20. But I think a lot of lessons were learned through the process, and a lot of learnings about how to be a good mother and how to slow down. And I'm just so happy that we made it to the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we sit here, I'm thinking back to when I met you and it was through Zoom. And you were already using my online masterclass. So that was great because we were already speaking the same metaphorical language. But it was also great because when I get to do personal counseling versus a user just using the content and working through the app, watching the videos and things, then they wouldn't have any involvement with me personally. But I love being able to get into the journey with the ladies and to help them see how to customize the program and the material for them personally. I had no idea what we were going to step into in your journey. Would you please give the listeners some of the history?
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband and I started trying to conceive in early 2020, sort of just as COVID kind of erupted and lockdown happened. And as most people know who are trying to conceive, you know, the second that it doesn't happen, it's not happening.
In your mind.
In your mind.
And you were
in my mind.
And you were how old in 2020?
34.
Okay.
I think I'm bad at math. Yeah, 34. And, you know, it was lockdown. There was a lot of stress. There was work from home. And so like it became a bit of, you know, an obsession sort of once it wasn't happening. And being kind of the type A person that I am, I said, you know, let's go explore some testing and see what's going on if there's a reason this isn't happening, even though it had only been, I think, about 5 months of trying at that point. And we were guided towards doing IVF. And I think at that point, I started reframing what felt disappointing as, okay, this is just a quick solve. We will do a round of IVF and I'll be pregnant. And I kind of like had the whole plan in mind of like, okay, we'll do IVF in, you know, August or September, and then we'll be pregnant. And that was kind of how my brain always worked at that point. And as anyone knows that's been through any kind of fertility journey, whether it's, you know, an IUI or IVF or more complicated, like my journey's been, it never really goes as planned. And a friend of mine said to me at one point in the beginning, which was probably the truest advice I was ever given, there is a setback at every stage. And it's really true. Mm-hmm. In my case, there were several setbacks. And so we started IVF, and it wasn't working the way that we had hoped. We really struggled to make good, healthy embryos with every round. And so it became several rounds of IVF. And
can I interrupt for just a second?
Of course.
Were you doing this in New York at this point?
Yes. So we were living in New York. I'm from New York. I live in LA now. But we were, just starting the process of figuring out, was there an egg quality issue? Endometriosis was being thrown around as a word that I didn't really know or understand, or certainly was not familiar with. And it kind of felt like a process of trial and error a bit. We weren't getting the embryos that we wanted. The quality wasn't there. We knew we wanted, at least 2 kids. We wanted the option for that. So with only 1 embryo at each round, if that, it felt like we had to keep going and banking more.
So the embryos that you were getting, were they testing abnormal?
Some were testing abnormal. I kind of had, like, in the beginning, 1 embryo per round that was testing normal. So I had some abnormals. I also had a lot of drop off from the number of eggs, the number that fertilized, and the amount that made it to day 5.
Mm-hmm. And so you decided to do what with this information?
Basically, we decided to keep going. It didn't really feel like we had many options.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all.
Were you putting those in and doing transfers, and the transfers were not being successful?
So we banked some embryos to begin with. So we started this whole process in August of 2020, and I didn't do my very first transfer until April of 2021.
Okay, that's interesting. That it took that long to get how many embryos banked?
3.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And so you didn't get any information as to why or what might be affecting that, though I have an idea, but I'm trying to remember in your case, did you get it?
We didn't really have a clear answer at that point. With each sort of round that wasn't going well, there was more discussion about endometriosis as a possible issue. At that point, it was discussed in the sense of, if you think you might have endo, or if we think that might be what's happening here, the only real way to address it is with surgery. And so we were sort of like hedging a bit and trying to see how we could get around that without rushing into surgery, because we wanted to expedite things on the IVF front. And my doctor's point, which I fully agree with to this day, and I always tell people when I share my story, is women with endo get pregnant all day long. Tons of them.
Mm-hmm. Every day. And
tons who don't have it also have issues getting pregnant. So it's not sort of a turnkey diagnosis solution situation. So I wasn't really eager to jump into a surgery that I might not need, especially when I didn't really know exactly if I even had endo. So we were trying at least to like take initial steps towards doing a transfer, and then doing a transfer before ultimately having surgery, which is what I ended up doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was this other very interesting thing happening in August 2020, which was that we were thick into the COVID quarantine, that whole era for humans. And what I witnessed as a practitioner, specifically working with fertility patients, was egg counts were dropping off. The IVF outcomes were not what they had always been. Something was affecting them. And from a holistic practitioner point of view, I believe it had something to do with a combination of emotions and inflammation. And I do think that women who are potentially riddled with endometriosis, they have an inflammatory pelvis to begin with. And as we add huge amounts of stress and hormones to it, it just puts more kindling onto a fire. So I think that, kind of to match your point, I feel like if we did a laparoscopy on the next 10 women out on the street, we'd probably find some endo on at least 9 of them. I think it's kind of there. Everybody has some inflammation, but how bad it affects their fertility outcomes and their journey and leads to unexplained infertility, like we can't we can't get data on that.
Yeah, there was so much of this stuff being discussed. And certainly, I mean, it was a time of incredible stress for me and my husband. So as I mentioned, we started our journey in August of 2020. In November of 2020, actually like the day before, I guess it was like my third retrieval, my mom was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. Mm-hmm. So add that on top of being in lockdown, being in a global pandemic, you know, being scared to be in public or touch anything, you know, going to a doctor's office, you know, felt incredibly risky. There was a ton of stress, and, you know, inflammation was a word that came up all the time that I didn't really understand. You know, one of the things that I look back on and feels so kind of crazy to me, and something that I want to change for other women, and certainly for like the next generation of women, is like, I didn't even know what endometriosis was until I was trying to conceive and it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. I think if I was trying to conceive and it worked, I still probably wouldn't know what it is. So there, you know, as some silver lining in all of this, there was an incredible opportunity for me to educate myself about my body and women's bodies generally, and inflammation and what that means and where it comes from and how it could be impacting me. So yeah, there was just a lot going on in that moment.
Yeah. And the idea of grief mixed with the grief of your mom having a terminal illness, plus this threat to our survival, you can just intuit what that does to the ovarian reserve on our subconscious programming level. What we're thinking and feeling is vibrating at a certain frequency through our whole body. Not to go too woo-woo, but to speak from a physics point of view or quantum healing model. From science, we say neuroplasticity, the thoughts that we're thinking and the neurons in our brain, they're following the thoughts. So on some primal subconscious level, you were scared and sad, and you didn't have answers, and you're data driven. So confused. And it's not that surprising. Like when we met and we talked via Zoom, it wasn't that surprising to me to hear that those outcomes hadn't been very positive. So we had a conversation. We started talking about ways to reconcile emotions. Do you remember that conversation? I think that's how we started.
Yes. I mean, we were talking about that in terms of the grief, in terms of the stress, and in terms of the action plan around what was going on with me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. To try to give you some sense of agency in this. But when I met you, your mom had actually passed away. Right. So yes. I almost skipped over a portion of your story. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. So yeah, kind of going back. So she was diagnosed at the end of 2020. And then kind of the next year and a half following that, there were tons of new stressors introduced as well. So I did bank a couple of good embryos. I did my first transfer, as I mentioned, in April of 2021, and I had a chemical pregnancy. I'll never forget the nurse calling me from the fertility clinic, and she was like, "You're pregnant," right after the first beta. And I was like, of course it worked. Like, I was so sure it wouldn't work because I was being so self-protective. And it was such an immediate relief when I was, and then the next beta just didn't go up. So, you know, my doctor at the time said, you know, everyone's allowed a failed transfer. It happens. And we did another one, and it didn't take at all. And at that point, we were sort of like, okay, maybe we need to relook into the endo stuff as a more serious possibility. So I did go ahead and have the surgery, and I did have endometriosis, and they removed it. And
was it an extensive case? Or do you recall?
I think it was like stage 2 or 3. There might have been like a combination of it, and it was kind of like all over my ovaries, all over my pelvis. So it was not surprising to the doctor once they got in there that I had the results that I'd had at that point. And I had the surgery, and again, it was the same feeling of like, oh, I'll have this surgery and then I'll get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually did another retrieval following the surgery and a fresh transfer just to sort of try something different. And that transfer also didn't take. And I didn't have any other good embryos from that retrieval. So at that point, I had 3 failed transfers and several retrievals and a surgery, and I was kind of nowhere.
And a chemical pregnancy.
And a chemical pregnancy. And I felt super defeated. And a lot of people around me were getting pregnant, and that was really difficult. And my mom was really sick. And that was right around the time that we moved to LA. And it felt like a good time to kind of, hit the brakes for a second, reevaluate. We were having to, find a whole new team out here. And so we paused for a moment. And that felt really difficult because we were not moving forward, and I'm someone that likes to always be moving forward. And also helped like recalibrate a bit in terms of like what our action plan was and what was important to focus on.
Mm-hmm. And so what did that look like when the pause was done, or what did you decide? What felt like the pivot out of pausing?
It's a good question. I don't think there was anything that happened that like pivoted us out of the pause. I just think we gave ourselves the space to kind of like grieve the loss that we had been confronting at that point, move to a new city, settle in, like give that whole process the space that it needed, time to do research and find the right new team to put in place, whether it's the doctors, the acupuncturists, et cetera, and kind of feel a bit rejuvenated to start the whole process again. And so then we continued. We went back to retrievals. And over the next year or so, I still was just not really getting better results. It was sort of the same thing where maybe I would get 1 embryo. Sometimes I didn't even get 1 embryo. And I just felt like I'm getting older. I'm not making progress, and everyone around me is getting pregnant. What can I do?
So what did you do?
Kept going.
Like any self-respecting woman.
Yeah, I mean, I had no other choice, really.
Mm-hmm. And so is that when your doctor introduced you to the SEED Masterclass?
Yeah, right around then was when I learned about the SEED program. And like anyone in a, trying to conceive journey, headspace, whatever you want to call it, you kind of try anything, and I was so desperate and so convinced that this was happening because of something I wasn't doing, something I hadn't invested in enough, whether it was my diet or my lifestyle, throwing out everything plastic in my house, changing all of my personal care products. I always say that the process felt to me a little bit like dating when I was single and super eager to meet someone. I would always say to my therapist or to a friend, like, I don't understand why I'm not meeting someone. I'm doing all of the things. I'm putting myself out there. I'm on the apps. I'm meeting people and telling them I'm single. Do you want to set me up with someone? And the universe is like not responding. And similarly, I felt like I've found the best doctors. I'm doing acupuncture. I'm, eating full fat dairy, but not too much dairy. And I'm trying to not eat gluten, and I'm eating a Brazil nut every day, and all of these crazy, trying to conceive diet things. And I'm not using any microplastics, and none of it was working.
And so when none of it is working, frustration is mounting, which is an emotion. And that is, if I can say anything, that's where we know, let's pick up or start with the emotions. I can't remember if you're at the place in your story, your mom was still alive at the point. When we met, your mom had already transitioned. But I don't know if that's...
So at the point that I found the SEED program and I had just moved here, her condition had worsened significantly, but she was still alive. So the first year that I was living here in LA, I was traveling back to New York quite a bit, just to spend time with her as she was getting worse, wanting to see her. And she died in June of 2022.
Mm-hmm. So when you were using that content, you were probably just focused on the food and ignoring the emotional work, or it felt like the emotional work.
I think I felt like I was doing it all, but I don't know that I actually was.
Going through the motions.
I was doing my best.
Yeah, you're probably going through the motions.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, in Chinese medicine, grief is related to the lungs, and the lungs do play an important role in fertility. If anything, they're our source of inspiration, right? We breathe in fresh air and we let go of waste. And that is very ebb and flow philosophy for any kind of journey in life. So for you to be going through all that, I imagine you were literally just either holding your breath or being frustrated. And when we did meet, I wanted to start there with, let's start peeling the layers, because I could just see you were stuck within yourself because you had been doing all of the things. So I'm trying to remember what it was that we said. I think I asked you to remember how it was when you were dating and to look back over that time of life. I'm always negotiating with my patients to help them to look at the process differently. But I just wanted to validate you in that time of like, wow, that is so frustrating to be putting everything into it and getting nothing back. So what did you do when you finally shifted to think either this is a spiritual journey or an emotional piece for me to work through, or where did the pivot come? Because something shifted for you. And I, from my perspective, I saw, like, we had the first Zoom, I saw how angry you were. And then the second Zoom, there was just like a little bit more of a lightness. And I don't know what shifted. Do you?
It's a good question. I think over the entirety of my journey, with every failure, every setback, every frustration, everything that wasn't going as planned, there was a little bit more surrender on my part. And I mean, being the kind of type A person that I am and wanting to always know the plan and being in control, that's like an incredibly difficult thing for me to do. But I, like I said in the beginning, when we first sat down here today, like, there were so many lessons in the unfolding sort of saga that we went through. And I think one of the biggest ones was like, when having children and just growing up, honestly, you have to surrender in some ways, and you have to be able to just, let go. And even if, as I say this out loud, I'm like still not very good at this.
I'm
still learning. But I think there were some huge forced lessons in that, as things didn't go well, that I still felt really clear that I knew what the outcome was that I wanted. And I felt really clear that I was not willing to give up on it. And so the only choice I really had was to like continue to be committed to it. And sometimes that meant being patient and repeating the same things that weren't working, whether it was doing another retrieval, doing another transfer. And sometimes it meant, thinking about things in a new way and doing something different. And I think, so when we met, I was already going down the road of using a surrogate. And I think what was happening around the time we met was that the surrogate who carried my son, our first surrogate, had miscarried. And
one of your embryos.
One of my embryos. Yeah. Genetically, my egg, my husband's sperm.
How confusing that must have been. Here's a woman with a proven successful uterus, and even she had the loss.
Yeah. And I think similar again to how I felt at the very beginning of like, oh, I'll just do IVF and then I'll get pregnant. I felt like I didn't really, want to use a surrogate. It wasn't what I planned on. It was not the way that I, imagined building my family. And so that felt like a big concession. And that felt honestly like a loss and like a shift in the path that I had to grieve. And when I finally made peace with it, or at least somewhat, it wasn't working. And that felt like such a betrayal of how can this thing that's supposed to solve for our problem not be working? And that was just like another layer of surrender of, okay, but I have to try again.
Yeah, I think that this process takes us to the farthest point that we are willing and able to go. And for you, it took you right there where, okay, we'll use a carrier. And when that didn't even work, it's like, what do you do with that much grief? So yes, surrender is key. And what other choice do you have?
None. Keep going.
So were you using, once you started using the SEED program, was it easier? Did you make better embryos? And it's hard to say because you were at a different clinic.
It's hard to say. I had switched clinics a couple of times given our move and just kind of shifting things around in our life. And, it's hard to point to exactly what, but the craziest sort of stat of our entire journey over the course of 4 years was that I did 8 total retrievals. And in 7 retrievals, I don't think I made 7 embryos total that were good. And in my 8th retrieval, I made 9 healthy, good embryos, many of which are still in the freezer.
9 normals?
9 normals. I mean, when the doctor called to tell us, she was laughing. She's like, you won't actually believe me. And we both looked at each other like, are you sure? That's our result.
Right. So 9 normals from how many fertilized embryos from how many eggs? Let's work that backwards.
Okay. Off the top of my head, you're challenging me, but roughly, I think it was between like 15 and 19 eggs retrieved. That was kind of like always in the neighborhood of what I got. And then maybe like 12 fertilized. So most of them made it, which was, unheard of for me. Unheard of. Somewhere
something shifted. And I always say to my patients that as we peel the layers of emotional pain and inflammation, I do recall putting you onto that protocol, the post-COVID protocol that pulls out the fibrins and the inflammation and whatever with the supplements. We were approaching it from a multi-pronged angle. You were surrendering. You were changing your diet. You were taking supplements to keep inflammation down. You had had surgery. And we could say that you were essentially healing, in quotes, because a lot of people are triggered by that word, but your body was healing as you weren't adding more inflammation with frustration. Once we learn the energy of surrender, it does get easier to practice it, even though we wouldn't want to be sitting with constant disappointment to learn how to surrender. You had no choice. If you were going to make this family, you were going to learn surrender.
I think that, so when I had that really good retrieval, that was after we decided to work with a gestational carrier, but before we did the first transfer. So that was, I think, a bit of a like weight lifted off my shoulders of like, I don't have to do all the work anymore. I'm going to have this retrieval to see if we can make a couple more embryos for the surrogate, but it's not all on me. And then I had this great result, but then we also then went back a couple steps because then she miscarried.
Right.
And I think from an inflammation standpoint, when I look back, it's a little crazy to think about because I had the endo surgery, which removed all of this inflammation, but I was continuing to do retrievals, which actually was exacerbating the endo at the same time. So there was always like a bit of a give and take.
Like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you decided to get a second surrogate.
Yeah. So our journey sort of really got extra challenging after the first miscarriage. We, a couple of months later, did another transfer to the same surrogate, feeling really optimistic, kind of thinking, okay, well, it just didn't work the first time, but thank God we now have more embryos to play with. And she had miscarried at 9 weeks the first time. And then the second transfer, she miscarried at 5 weeks. And that was probably rock bottom for us in all of this. And we both just felt so depressed, so defeated, so burnt out by the whole process, depleted financially, depleted mentally. Again, as, people in our, mid to late 30s, as this whole process was going on, everyone we loved and cared about around us was getting pregnant. And that was another huge part of like major difficulty more for me than my husband, honestly, to find space to like be happy for people in my life that I love and care about. And also really feel sorry for myself that I couldn't achieve what I wanted and watching so many other people do it with ease. So that was like another piece of grief that I was also trying to manage. And I'll never forget, we were visiting New York. It was, late August, early September. And we were up at my husband's country house, sitting in this little room that was his office during the pandemic. And I was just sitting on the floor with my head in my hands, sort of feeling like, where do we go from here? And I kind of just looked at him and I was like, this is so crazy, but I feel like we should just get a new surrogate and start over because it's not working. And we can do one more transfer to our existing surrogate just because it was, part of the contract and she was willing, thankfully, to do a third one. And it was a little bit of a Hail Mary, I guess. But I was like, with our luck, we will have 2 kids basically born at the same time and it'll work with both of them. And we like kind of both laughed. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, yes, but there was also a part of you were entertaining putting one of the embryos in yourself.
Oh, yes. And I hadn't given up on me yet.
Yes,
and
so you and I were really laughing that there would be triplets that all came in. So what happened with that? Did you decide to do another transfer?
So we did a third transfer to our first surrogate. That's my son. He was born this past August. It worked. Everything went really smoothly with that pregnancy, thankfully, but we were holding our breath like basically the entire time. And just before we did that third transfer, we also matched with another carrier. So we started that process. And I was at that point still entertaining doing an implant for myself, but I was kind of like, well, let's see what happens with both of these. And I think that as things developed with each of those surrogates, the idea of, putting my body through much more sort of hormone treatment and like physical challenges just felt less interesting. And as I saw the possibility of a baby coming into my life that was mine and somebody else carrying, it felt more comfortable, and I felt more comfortable moving away from me being pregnant. And I'm really glad that I made that decision because I had had enough. I mean, my body was at capacity for, other IVF and additional interventions at that point.
And more hormone exposure and potentially disappointment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so then you've got 2 surrogates pregnant within 4 months' time?
Yep. So the first, my son's transfer was right around Thanksgiving. And then we transferred my daughter in May.
And then both of these women are carrying your baby.
The transfers were 6 months apart. Yeah.
Okay. So then the women are both pregnant, carrying your babies, and you're trusting it, not trusting it, feeling conflicted.
I don't know. I honestly feel like I was really numb during a lot of that time because I think we were nervous. We were self-protective. We were holding on to so much hope, but like also so scared of disappointment and being hurt. And then there's like a bit of a feeling of disconnect, of course, because it's not my body. And, it got to the point of like late summer and my son's due date was approaching and people saying, oh my God, you're having a baby so soon. Are you so excited? And I was excited, but I couldn't really like connect to the feeling of like, we are about to bring a baby home into our house until he arrived, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so cute. And then having that time with him, knowing that his sister was on her way, how did you 2 adjust there? Or is there anything you want to say about that for the listeners?
I mean, I think we adjusted as well as anyone adjusts to having a baby for the first time, which is to say, it was a rude awakening. I think in many ways I thought that we were more prepared than some people for having a baby, just because we were so desperate for one and wanting and longing for such a long time, and so much time to prepare and do research and buy all the right things and ask all the questions. I mean, nothing can prepare you for bringing home, even the most perfect, well-behaved, well-sleeping baby. It totally rocked us. And I did not expect that. But
at least you're being honest.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was hard. It's still really hard. And then in the first week of November of 2024, on like a particularly good day when I was like home on mat leave with my son and, kind of like had just found our rhythm, I got out of the shower while he was napping, and I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, I think I finally like have this. Things are good. Like, we're in a routine, like it's working. And our other surrogate, who we transferred to second, called and said, I'm on my way to the hospital. I have a little bit of fluid coming out, and I just want to make sure everything's okay. She did not sound worried at all, but
and
she's
she
like,
was how many weeks along?
29. And she, is super responsible and on top of it. So she was like, just in case something's not right, I'm going to go to the hospital. And then the next call an hour later was from the doctor with her saying it is amniotic fluid. She's going to stay in the hospital until she delivers. If not before 34 weeks, then at 34 weeks, she will be induced. And I was just like, what? Like,
I just got my footing.
I just got my bearings here. We were not expecting my daughter until January, and 34 weeks was going to be first week of December. So 6 weeks early. And I just remember thinking, like, it never ends. The setbacks, the bumps in the road, the challenges, the unforeseen issues, they just really don't stop. And we kind of held our breath for 5 weeks. And thankfully, my daughter stayed cozy and she was induced. My surrogate was induced at 34 weeks, and my daughter was born premature. Thankfully, like, came out very healthy, 4 pounds, 11 ounces, breathing on her own. She did need a little bit of respiratory support, and she spent 12 days in the NICU, but came home and she's thriving and she's doing great. But no part of this journey, went the way that we thought it would. Even when we thought we had gotten through the biggest hurdles, there was always something else waiting.
Mm-hmm. Which is, interestingly, your segue now into what you're thinking of doing is helping to guide other women through that feeling of nothing is working.
Yeah. So my professional background has been in marketing my entire career, and I've been really lucky and had a lot of great opportunities, and I've loved what I've done, but I never felt like it was my purpose. And I always sort of had this like weird voice in my head of like, I wish I was one of those people that like had a calling in life. And then this whole thing happened to us, and it felt really tragic and really hard. And, it feels kind of cheesy to say now, but it does feel like it happened for a reason and like to provide some kind of purpose. And I finally feel like I've lived this really unique, crazy, difficult experience, in part probably to like have learned some lessons myself, but in some way to use that lived experience to help other people and inform them. And like, I wish that I had known someone like myself and had like another really good friend who had used a surrogate. Unfortunately, while I didn't have like a personal friend, we worked with a concierge service to help us match with our surrogates. And Marley was an incredible, incredible resource and just person to have in our corner.
Mm-hmm. Marley Steinman is guest number 5, or she's in episode number 5 of the Baby Makers, for the listeners that want to hear more about her. But you had a personal experience with her. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, she helped us match with both of our surrogates really, really quickly, which was incredible. And she just kind of worked with us throughout the whole journey, was a sounding board for things that came up, helped us, think about different things that we had to confront along the way, whether it was like issues with medication, certain conversations that we needed to have, preparations that we needed to make. We couldn't have done it without her. And she's really inspired me to figure out how I can like take this experience that I've had and give back and use it as, a purposeful way to guide other women and couples going through the same process. So like I mentioned, I am from New York. That's kind of where I started my whole journey. And so I've set up a similar concierge business where I'm working with patients kind of funneled through the clinics in New York, where I can help them match with surrogates as well and help guide them through that journey or coach them through the fertility kind of saga that they might be in, whether it's like the very beginning of IVF or thinking about using a carrier. And I finally feel like, oh, this is what it feels like to have a purpose and to have really meaningful work that will help others and give back, and like has been really healing for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine that anyone that you work with is going to feel how much you have gone through it yourself. And there's something so important on that with an ally who really understands. And several of the guests in the final season, as they're mostly women who have gone through it, we're talking about what we do with the time as we're waiting. And the majority of the time is about surviving disappointments and surviving failure and reframing and learning how to do these things, learning how to be a little bit more spiritual, learning what it means to surrender. And I wanted to bring these kinds of conversations into my show and as I wrap it up, because I think that the more that we hear that it's possible and the ways that women do it, and also to say it's different for every different woman, her story is going to be different, but there's something very beautiful about that. But hearing from others, like the women that use the SEED program, for instance, they say that it's those videos that they saw of other women and sharing their story that gave them the inspiration and the encouragement. When they would see it, they think, well, if she can do that, I can do my story. Right.
Yeah. I think that if I can be that, story that someone listens to and feels like, oh, well, it was so challenging for her, but she finally got to the other side. Like, there's nothing I would want more than that. That was sort of what I was always looking for when we were going through it, was like another story that felt equally challenging, but like ended up with a good result. And I mean, I was just having a conversation like this with someone the other day that said, I feel like the world is telling me I'm not meant to be a mom. And I felt that so much during our journey all the time. Like, should I just give up? Should I just give into this? Like, it's not happening. And I would just say to anyone that's listening or, thinking that or feeling that and feeling so defeated, like, if you want it and you're willing to fight for it, like, it absolutely will happen, and don't give up.
Mm-hmm. Don't give up. You can take a pause.
Sure.
Like
you have to take pauses.
You have to know when to say, like, this is too much and I need to step back.
Yeah.
Or I need to focus my energy on something different, because that is when other things can start to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way that energy works. Life works like that. When we're so hyper-focused, it seems to put too much pressure on that. But when we switch gears into living life, shifts happen.
Definitely.
So you are creating a website. So you tell me how people can find you, particularly if they're in New York and they want to start working with you to navigate the process of surrogacy, of infertility. You're kind of like the girlfriend on the case, like a lot of women going through this, they feel isolated. They can't bring this to their girlfriends because, like you said, everybody else is seemingly getting pregnant easily. So for you to come in as like a girlfriend with some tools.
Yeah, I definitely people would want to work with me if they're wanting a more personal approach and to feel like they can have someone who's, really well-versed and well-connected in this space professionally, but will be like a friend, a best friend, someone really familiar who they can interact with really informally. And like, I'm a direct line, you know, they can text me, they can call me, and I will help them achieve their goals, whether it's with a surrogate or otherwise in their fertility journey. I am working on my website and we will tag it in the show notes, I guess. But for now, people can find me on Instagram and it's Carly P. Joseph.
Great. Are there any final words that you would like to share with the listeners or your prospective clients, like with respect to letting go and how you did it?
I wish I had like, you know, a magic bullet piece of advice. I don't think that I ever felt like I was doing it well when I was doing it. I think when I look back, I feel really proud of the strength that I had. And I wish one thing I had done better that I would, you know, offer out to anyone, you know, listening, someone that wants to work with me, someone that's really going through it, is to just kind of stop and like give yourself grace for how far you've come and how much you've put in and how absurdly difficult and common this whole thing is and how hard it actually is to get pregnant and build your family. And that, you know, it does take time and it takes commitment and dedication and patience in many cases. And that whatever you're doing is enough and you can keep going when you're ready to give more and you will get there.
Mm-hmm. How hard it has become. This is humans' evolution. So I'm so glad that you're joining the community to help pull more women over or help hold their hand when they feel like giving up.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.